What happens when a routine hearing explodes into a national scandal because of one damning sentence? Kash Patel walked into that hearing thinking he was untouchable, until Jasmine Crockett read aloud the one line that shattered his entire facade. In front of the world, the air in room 2141 was heavy, not from heat, but from anticipation no one had yet acknowledged. Jasmine Crockett sat in silence, her fingers lightly tapping a closed folder as if sensing the storm hidden within. She had reviewed the documents a dozen times the night before, her eyes aching from hours of reading metadata, email headers, and transcripts. But she wasn't tired, not now. She was focused, like a blade sharpened over months of quiet rage. This hearing wasn't supposed to be pivotal, not officially. But in her gut she knew. Something was about to break open. Across from her sat Kash Patel, exuding smugness in every casual gesture. He leaned back, arms folded, with the confident detachment of someone who believed the system would always protect him. Jasmine watched him closely, not out of curiosity, but calculation. Every blink, every smirk, every deflection was a thread she was ready to pull. She remembered the first time she'd read the leaked email buried deep in the digital maze of evidence. It had made her stop breathing for a second. Deny knowledge unless you're backed into a corner. It wasn't just a lie, it was a strategy. A learned behavior. The cameras clicked softly in the background as the chairman droned through introductions. To the public, it was all routine, a blur of suits and microphones. But inside Jasmine's chest, her heart beat like a drumline. She wasn't nervous, she was ready. This wasn't about a headline or even about Patel. It was about pulling the curtain back on how truth was manipulated and power abused. She thought of the aide, still anonymous, who had risked everything to send her the documents. Someone out there believed in justice enough to light the fuse. Jasmine had no intention of letting that fire die. When her name was called, she didn't hesitate. She leaned forward, clicked her mic on, and pulled the unmarked page from her folder with calm, deliberate movement. "Mr. Patel, I'd like to read something to you," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel. The room barely stirred, until she began to read. It wasn't the volume. It was the silence that followed. Every word echoed like a gavel striking down on lies long protected. Patel's eyes twitched. His smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked caught. Jasmine didn't blink. She knew the game had changed, and it was only the beginning. Kash Patel's confident mask began to slip the moment the email left Jasmine's lips. He blinked rapidly, his fingers tightening around the edges of his prepared statement. "That email must be misattributed," he muttered, almost too quickly. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She let the silence stretch, let him sit, in the weight of his own denial. Then she calmly reached into her folder again and pulled out a copy of the email metadata. "We traced it back to your government-issued device, Mr. Patel. Time-stamped, verified. Would you like to amend your statement?" Her voice was razor-sharp, but it wasn't anger. It was certainty. Patel looked to his lawyer, a stiff-jawed man, in a navy suit who placed a hand on his forearm under the table. A silent warning. Shut up. But silence was no longer his ally. Jasmine began listing off dates and communication logs, each one a nail in the coffin of his defense. "On this date, you sent a message using encrypted channels. Who were you hiding? It from, Mr. Patel? Us? Or the American people?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The cameras had stopped yawning. Reporters leaned forward. People watching from home sat up straighter. Something real was happening, and they knew it. As Patel stammered through half-answers and technical jargon, Jasmine dropped the screenshots. Messages between Patel and an unnamed associate. Cryptic but damning. "Let's keep this off radar," one message read. "Too risky if it leaks," Patel scoffed. "You're seriously bringing screenshots now?" He laughed, a hollow, nervous bark. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Do you dispute the content?" she asked, locking eyes with him. There it was. Again, that flicker, not anger, not arrogance, fear. And the whole room saw it. It was the moment his power began to shrink. Outside the hearing, the clip of that exchange exploded online. Within an hour, hashtags like Patel lied and Crockett exposed truth were trending nationwide. Activists, journalists, even former staffers began sharing cryptic posts. "I've seen those emails too," one wrote. "This is just the beginning." Jasmine watched the storm build, but she didn't allow herself to feel victorious. Not yet. She knew how quickly systems protect themselves, how scandals get sanitized, but this time felt different. The people were watching, and Jasmine was far from done. Patel's breathing grew shallow as Jasmine placed a small black device on the desk in front of her. It was a voice recorder, unassuming in appearance, but it carried the weight of 1,000 headlines. "Before we play this," she said calmly, "I want to remind you that you are still under oath." Patel's mouth parted slightly. His skin had taken on a dull, ashen tone. He looked not at Jasmine, but at the device, as if it were a ticking bomb. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently in his ear, but Patel didn't hear him. He was spiraling, trapped in the echo chamber of his own worst fears. The audio crackled to life. Patel's voice, unmistakable, filled the room. "Deny knowledge unless you're backed into a corner. If they don't have the docs, they can't prove shit." His tone was casual, even smug. Laughter followed on the recording. Others in the room, complicit. Jasmine didn't pause it. She let it play, and as it did, you could feel the walls close in on him. No more ambiguity, no more technical denials, just his own voice, betraying him to the world. The committee room was dead silent. The chairman's face had lost its practiced neutrality. Even he looked shaken. One congresswoman pressed a hand to her mouth. A young reporter at the back of the room started typing furiously, his fingers trembling. Patel stood up suddenly, his chair screeching backward, sharp and jarring like a scream. "I've had enough of this circus," he barked. "This is a witch hunt." But it wasn't conviction. It was collapse. He turned on his heel, ignoring the chairman's commands to stay. The cameras followed him like hawks, capturing every desperate footstep as he stormed out. His walkout wasn't the end. It was gasoline on a fire. Cable news switched to wall-to-wall coverage. Former aides started contacting journalists. Legal analysts broke down every word of the recording. Public opinion, already leaning, now tilted hard. But for Jasmine, it wasn't about ratings or spectacle. As Patel vanished behind the hearing room doors, she felt something shift. Not relief, resolve. She turned back to the microphone, her voice firm. "We will recess briefly. But this hearing is not over." The audience online and in the room could feel it. This wasn't just a political unraveling. It was the cracking open of something deeper, a system, a strategy, a culture of silence that had just lost one of its most arrogant defenders. The night after the hearing, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the only light coming from a desk lamp that buzzed faintly. Her inbox had exploded, hundreds of emails, some filled with gratitude, others with threats. One message simply read, "Keep going. We've waited years for someone like you." She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. The weight of what she had done and what still lay ahead settled heavily on her chest. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. Meanwhile, the fallout from Patel's walkout spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Patel caught," in lie under oath, while morning talk shows replayed the audio recording on a loop. But beneath the media frenzy, something more unsettling began to emerge. Whistleblowers came forward, quietly at first, through encrypted emails, anonymous calls, meeting requests with no names attached. They referenced the playbook, a set of tactics allegedly taught within powerful political circles to obstruct, delay, and deny. And Patel, it seemed, had followed it to the letter. Jasmine met with the first whistleblower in a parking garage, like something out of a spy film. A former aide, barely older than 30, handed her a thumb drive and whispered, "He's not the only one. They trained us to cover for them." The us. Fear in his eyes was real. Jasmine realized then, this wasn't just about Patel, it was systemic. An entire culture of deception, nurtured in shadows, now threatened by the light of a single hearing. Back at the Capitol, some of Jasmine's colleagues began to distance themselves. Not everyone welcomed transparency. "You made it personal," one congressman hissed in a private corridor. "This was supposed to be theater, not a takedown." But Jasmine wasn't swayed. The public deserved truth, even if the truth made people uncomfortable. Especially then. That night, she drafted a motion for a wider investigation, not just into Patel, but into the machinery that protected men like him. And across the country, something stirred. College students replayed clips of the hearing in political science classes. Activists tweeted her words with hashtags like "Crockett cracked it" and "Her the truth." Jasmine hadn't just exposed one man. She had cracked open a door people didn't even realize had been locked. Jasmine sat on the steps of the Capitol one early morning, long before the tourists arrived, before aides buzzed by with briefcases and coffee cups. The marble beneath her was cold, but she needed that grounding sensation, something real, solid. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe without urgency. Her phone was silent, but in her mind, the echoes of the hearing still roared. She had revealed the truth, yes, but at what cost? She stared at the sunrise and wondered, was it enough? Back in her district, people weren't just watching, they were mobilizing. At barbershops and libraries, churches and college campuses, people were talking about her. Not about the scandal, but about the courage it took to confront it. A single mother in Dallas left a voicemail saying, "My daughter watched you and said, 'I want to be her.'" Jasmine replayed that message 5 times, tears finally coming when she heard the child's voice in the background. But not all. Reflections were warm. Conservative media painted her as a grandstander, a radical with an agenda. One commentator mocked her tone. Another questioned her intelligence. Jasmine knew these tactics too well. They were designed to silence, to belittle. And yet each insult only sharpened her resolve. She didn't fight to be liked. She fought to be heard, and more importantly, to make others feel seen. Internally, she wrestled with isolation. Some longtime colleagues barely acknowledged her in the halls. They liked her more when she stayed in the background, when she followed protocol, played the game. But Jasmine wasn't playing anymore. Her relationships were changing. Some friendships had cooled, others had grown deeper. Her team, once just staffers, now stood by her like comrades. They believed in the mission. They believed in her. Everywhere she looked, she saw reflections of herself. Young girls in hoodies, activists with bullhorns. Everyday people who had been told to wait their turn or lower their voices. But Jasmine had stood up. And by doing so, she gave them permission to stand too. The days that followed were a blur. Headlines, subpoenas, veiled threats, and spontaneous rallies across the country. Jasmine Crockett had become more than just a representative. She was now a symbol. But symbols were dangerous things. They inspired hope, yes, but they also invited enemies. Each morning she walked into her office at the Capitol, she noticed how the silence around her had changed. The air no longer carried indifference. It hummed with tension. People either avoided her gaze or stared too long. Jasmine could feel it in her bones. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning to show its real face. Security was quietly increased around her. 2 men in black suits had started trailing. Her movements, not official bodyguards, but something unofficially assigned. Jasmine didn't ask questions. She already knew. Word had reached her that high-level officials were not only disturbed by what she'd exposed, but terrified of what she might reveal next. Patel was no longer the focus. He was the thread that, once pulled, began to unravel a much deeper and more sinister tapestry. And Jasmine. She was holding that thread in her hand. At home, Jasmine's life was unrecognizable. Her parents had been relocated to a safe location. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages at all hours, some from fellow politicians offering support behind closed doors, others from anonymous whistleblowers sharing encrypted files, documents, and names. The pressure was enormous. Sleep was fleeting. Food had become an afterthought. She often found herself staring at her own reflection in the mirror, asking silently, "How much truth is too much?" But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the look on Patel's face when the truth cornered him, and it gave her strength. One night, as thunder rolled over D.C., an unmarked envelope arrived. No return address. Just a single word scrawled across it. Careful. Inside were classified documents, memos, communications between senior figures in the intelligence community. They referenced Patel, but also others, lawmakers, media executives, even a federal judge. They weren't just hiding corruption, they were orchestrating it. Jasmine sat in silence for what felt like hours, her fingertips numb, her heart pounding. This was no longer about justice for what had happened. It was about protecting democracy from what still might. She didn't panic. Instead, she summoned her team at dawn. "This isn't a scandal," she told them. "This is a machine. And we're about to show the world what it looks like when someone finally pulls the plug." The Capitol was no longer just a workplace. It was a battlefield. And Jasmine Crockett had just chosen to stay on the front lines. The hearing room was no longer a room. It had become a stage, a war zone, and a confessional booth all at once. Word had spread like wildfire. Jasmine Crockett was returning to the committee floor with what sources were calling indisputable proof. The public didn't need an invitation. They showed up in droves. Protesters outside chanted her name. Others waved signs demanding full transparency. Media vans choked the surrounding streets. It was no longer about Patel. This was about everyone. Jasmine entered in silence, but the weight she carried echoed louder than any voice. In her hands was a thick folder, its edges worn, its contents capable of toppling careers. Patel was nowhere in sight. His seat remained empty, a symbol of cowardice or maybe guilt. But that didn't stop what was coming. One by one, Crockett laid out the evidence. Classified memos, chain emails, hidden communications. A map of deceit that stretched across institutions, implicating names previously considered untouchable. As each name fell from her lips, gasps spread like wildfire across the room. Lawmakers shifted in their chairs, some pale, others seething. It wasn't just the evidence that hit hard. It was how calmly and relentlessly Jasmine delivered it. She wasn't looking for applause. She was demanding accountability. And when she pressed play on the final recording, a conversation between Patel and a media executive discussing how to manipulate public narratives, the room plunged into silence so deep, it felt sacred. And then, for the first time, Crockett paused, not to catch her breath, but to look every committee member in the eye. "How many of you knew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How many chose silence because the lie was easier than the truth?" No one answered, but their faces did. Jasmine didn't wait for apologies. She turned to the cameras. "This is not just about politics, it's about power, and who we become when we let that power go unchecked." The aftermath was seismic. Investigations were launched. Resignations followed. Patel fled the public eye. Subpoenas hit desks like thunderclaps. But most importantly, something cracked in the public consciousness. People no longer scrolled past. Congressional hearings. They demanded transparency. They asked questions. They remembered Jasmine's name, not because she was perfect, but because she refused to be silent when it mattered most. Jasmine didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory lap, just a quiet ride home and the knowledge that she'd forced a machine to show its face. She sat alone on her porch that night, watching the moon carve shadows across the lawn. The cost had been immense, her safety, her peace, even parts of her faith in others. But the truth, that was worth every piece. And now one question remained. Not for her, but for all of us. What will you do the next time someone tries to bury the truth?